She couldn't see the world around her, but her words had the power to cut deeper than any image. A blind black girl, living in silence, wrote a letter that no one expected. When a wealthy woman held those pages in her hands, she thought it was just another story. But as she read line after line, something inside her broke. Her tears weren't just for the girl. They were for a truth most people refuse to face. The question is, when you hear this story, will you cry too? It was a small room, quiet except for the scratching of a pencil against paper. The girl sat by the window, her eyes clouded, unable to see the light that poured in. She was blind from birth, but her heart carried visions stronger than sight. She had grown up hearing the whispers of pity, the sting of racism disguised as kindness, and the silence of people who looked away when they saw her struggle. Yet, instead of surrendering, she learned to capture her feelings in letters that spoke louder than her muted world. On this particular day, she pressed harder against the page, pouring every ounce of her pain, her hope, and her dignity into words she could not even see. She didn't write for fame. She didn't write for sympathy. She wrote because sometimes the only way to survive was to let the truth bleed onto paper. That letter, folded neatly, found its way into the hands of a wealthy woman, a woman who had everything the girl had been denied. The woman expected charity pleas, a sad request, or a story meant to move her briefly before she went back to her life of comfort. But what she was about to read was something else entirely. This was not a plea. It was a mirror, one that would force her to see a reality she had spent her entire life avoiding. The woman unfolded the letter, her fingers brushing across the uneven handwriting. At first, she thought it would be like so many other letters, short, pitiful, forgettable. But with every sentence, her expression shifted. The blind girl's words weren't begging. They were cutting. The letter began with memories the girl never truly saw but always felt. She wrote of sitting in classrooms where her skin made her invisible. Teachers spoke louder at her as if her blindness meant she couldn't understand. Children whispered cruel jokes thinking she couldn't hear. Strangers reduced her life to two tragedies, being black and being blind. But the words didn't stop at cruelty. They dug deeper into truths the woman had never dared to confront. The girl wrote of walking through neighborhoods where people clutched their purses tighter, not because of her disability, but because of her skin. She described moments where she reached for help, only to be met with silence, avoidance, and coldness. Each line painted a picture of a world that treated her existence as less than human. "I cannot see your faces," the girl wrote, "but I can feel your judgment. I cannot see your eyes, but I can hear when they turn away. And though I was born blind, I still see clearer than many who live with sight, because I see the truth of how you treat me." The woman's throat tightened as she read. The girl's pain was raw, stripped of decoration. But there was something more, unsettling than pain. It was the power behind the words. The girl wasn't simply exposing her own suffering. She was holding up a mirror to everyone who ever turned away. The wealthy woman paused, the letter trembling in her hands. Around her, the room felt smaller, colder. She could hear the faint ticking of the clock, the sound of her own breath uneven. For the first time, she realized that this letter wasn't about charity, or pity, or even blindness. It was about her. About people like her who lived in comfort while others carried invisible scars. And as she turned the page, her hands shook, because the next words would break her in a way she never expected. The woman turned to the final page, her hands trembling as if the paper itself burned. The words waiting for her were no longer just confessions of pain. They were an accusation, a plea, and a truth so sharp it pierced her carefully built walls. The blind girl wrote of the night her mother died. She was only 8. The ambulance had taken too long. The neighbors too afraid to knock on the door. The system too slow to respond to another poor black family in crisis. By the time help came, her mother's body was already still. The girl never saw her mother's face, but she remembered the sound of her voice, fading, broken, whispering, "Never let them make you small." The letter did not ask for pity. Instead, it demanded responsibility. "I am blind," the girl wrote, "but it is you who refuse to see. You live in houses with walls too high to hear our cries. You close your eyes to injustice because it is easier to pretend it does not exist. But when you read my words, you cannot look away. Because I am not asking for your tears. I am asking for your change. The wealthy woman pressed the page to her chest, her vision blurred by tears she could not stop. Each sentence stripped away her defenses, forcing her to confront truths she had buried under wealth and comfort. She had never met this girl, never heard her voice, never seen her face, yet she felt her presence more vividly than anyone in her life. Her sobs echoed in the silence, because the letter wasn't just a cry. From a blind girl, it was a mirror, reflecting the blindness of an entire world. The woman sat in silence long after the letter ended, her tears staining the paper she held so tightly. For the first time in her life, she felt powerless, not because she lacked wealth, or status, or influence, but because she could no longer hide behind them. A blind girl with nothing had stripped away the illusions of someone who had everything. She realized the letter wasn't written to break her. It was written to awaken her. And in that awakening came a question she could not escape. What would she do now? Days turned into weeks, but the words never left her. They echoed in her mind at dinner parties, in boardrooms, even in the stillness of the night. The blind girl had forced her to see what she had spent her life avoiding. That silence was complicity, and comfort was built on the suffering of others. The woman began to speak differently, to act differently, to notice the lives she had once ignored. But still, she knew that no matter what she did, it would never erase the reality that a little girl's mother had died waiting for help that never came. That reality was not hers to undo. And so, she did the only thing she could. She carried the letter with her everywhere. Folded, worn, fragile with tears, it became her reminder that blindness is not always of the eyes. Sometimes it is of the heart. This is not just her story, it is ours. Because the question left behind is not whether the woman cried, it is whether we will finally see